Masa, appreciate you hopping on today. Really excited at this intersection of AI. You guys have a bunch of great announcements, so thanks for hopping on today.
Thanks for having me.
So give us the rundown. Who are you? Where are you based? What are you building? And then we'll start to dive into the fun stuff.
Sure. So I found my way kind of to the sports, fitness, wellness industry by a little bit of a zigzag. I started out actually my career having majored and studied architecture as an architect, but sort of midway in my career, I guess I felt more excited and interested in building businesses and building buildings per se.
Mm-hmm.
And so I dabbled in startups and other kind of areas. But really, I think what's more relevant to what we're doing at the moment is my back half of the career. So was very fortunate to join kind of very innovative global companies such as Lego. And there I was helming the Lego robotics kind of educational platform that I sold into B2B schools and a little bit B2C for about 7 years. Then I moved to Apple. This was all in Japan. So I was country manager for Lego in Japan. Then as director of education over at Apple, I moved with the timing of the launch of the iPad, I was in charge of the launch strategy for education. So again, that's very much kind of B2B to sales and a little bit of direct to consumer through back to school campaigns. And then the last part was I was the first president of Tesla in Japan. And my remit was to launch the Model S, quickly scale the organization, build out the supporting infrastructure to help transition Japan to more sustainable transport. This was at a time when not many people knew Elon or certainly knew of Tesla. So that was very much direct to consumer, kind of brand building. So I would kind of categorize myself that, I'm kind of cut from the cloth where I'm very, very passionate about identifying emerging technologies that could scale, that has a great user experience, but most importantly have a net positive effect for society.
Love that. So why sports? You're doing all this stuff across tech and different areas of, we'll just call it manufacturing a little bit. What was the interest in sports? What was that opportunity? Because we're seeing a lot of people like yourself come from, we'll call it more traditional tech, that are now seeing this huge opportunity in sports. What was it for you where you were like, yep, this is it. There's a big opportunity here?
Yep, for sure. Yeah, I don't really look at that much anymore, but back in the day, especially my 40s, I used to be kind of a CrossFit junkie. So I really like to push myself to the brink of exertion, right? Mm-hmm. And during that training regimen, I started to notice, when you're really pushing yourself hard, your form starts to crumble. And of course, that's a ripe, opportunity for injuries, of which I've had many, from rotary cuff related, lower upper back, I mean, you name it, right? And so, from that point of time, I kept on thinking, why isn't there an easy way to understand your form, especially related to your MSK, musculoskeletal interaction? And it so happened that about, 8.5 years ago at a different startup, I met my two co-founders, Jonathan and Rahul, which, by the way, those guys get all the credit for anything related to technical achievement. Jonathan is a computer vision wizard. Rahul is he focuses on machine learning, deep learning technologies, and human computer interaction. So they definitely have kind of the technical skills. But we kind of made a bet at that time, one thinking, hey, if we really want to help the world move better and understand your form, corrective interventions, so you can prevent, or ideally prevent, if not reduce injuries, so you can optimize your performance. I was bringing my kind of CrossFit experience to the table. And what they brought and what we all collectively thought is, hey, and again, I want to go back 7 years ago, right? We made this bet that we thought mobile devices were going to get even more powerful than they were back then. Higher frame rates, higher processing capacity, GPU costs in the cloud were starting to come down to make it much more affordable for a pre-seed startup at that point to get going, to do a lot of video heavy, 3D processing. So that's the bet we made. And we thought, okay, let's think of folks who have daily user bodies, and it really matters, right? By winning a game or moving well. And that's where we landed in the category of sports.
Yeah. So you're solving a problem for yourself. You see this large growing market, which is sports or fitness or health, and all those obviously collide. You find your co-founders, you're now ready to go what's next? How do you approach? And again, we get a lot of founders that listen to these, so we try to slant a little towards that. But where do you go to next? How do you approach the fundraising journey? How do you approach learning sports as an ecosystem and how to move and operate within it? What does that first initial building look like? It's what now 3-4 years ago. I mean, maybe a little bit before then even, but that's when it really started to ramp up.
Funny enough, we actually started out very differently, as many, I think, early stage startups have a pivot in the journey. We had a few, one major and maybe a few minor, you could say. Originally, we're looking at the world and we noticed that there's security cameras everywhere. And if you think about the concept of security cameras, it's really capturing humans' worst behaviors in a way, right? Like in the case, there might be some kind of a crime, right? You want to find the person, or let's say in a gym environment, are there unpaid members trying to, sneak in, or are they members who are falsely saying that, they got injured when in fact, they prove, from the video footage proves that they haven't, and they're staging their injuries or something like that. And we want to flip that paradigm on its head, saying, why actually there's all this ubiquitous cameras in the world. Why isn't there a way to use that video footage, understanding people's movements in 3D, and then provide valuable metrics and insights back to that person? And that's actually where the company name came from, Uplift, because we wanted to have people have an uplifting experience. So we used our computer vision models early days to try to understand and track people working out in gyms. So whether it's weighted machines, free weights, body weights, we can track sets and reps. And then we were working on trying to track the weights themselves and also running algorithms for facial recognition as well. So it was a really complex technical problem. But at the same time, after having interviews with a few CEOs of major kind of gym chains, we noticed there's a little bit of a gap there in the market with what they felt was top priority, which is really operational excellence in managing their gyms versus maybe having this extra layer of membership benefit. So we felt there wasn't really strong product market fit, and the technical challenge was really immense, to do all those things. And then how are you going to manage people who want to opt out, and there's mirrors everywhere and the whole thing. So it so happened that we came across sort of the sports vertical, and especially in baseball, which is, kind of after the Moneyball 1.0, there's this new wave of really trying to understand biomechanics. And we were very fortunate to sign our first MLB team who wanted to use portable. So just 2 iPhones and 2 iPads is our current kind of commercialized solution in the market that we call Uplift Capture. And so we had wide adoption, like fast forward to today, where we have now a third of MLB teams. We're in the 3rd season now working with the MLB League for scouting. The teams use us for hitting and pitching and movement assessment, whether it's in the batting cage, in the weight room, in the bullpen. And then a number of D1, D2 NCAA college programs and over 30, I would say, like premier sports and training academies. So that's our kind of footprint today. And it's good because we focus on a few movements that not necessarily stationary, like rotary based. That's a single individual, but that individual moment really matters for that person's performance and in the game, making that difference.
I want to go back a step. Tell us a little bit about your pivots, how you thought through them, how you knew when it was the time, and then maybe a little bit of the details of what you actually did to make sure those transitioned smoothly for investors, for current customers, for everyone.
Yep. So the first major pivot from targeting sort of the gym fitness industry as our first foray, I still think that's very viable, especially with our new product that I'd love to talk about in a bit. But back then, it was really that meeting, with these 2 CEOs, captains of industry that, they together and collectively, they own a majority of market share of the gyms out there. And when they really said, it wasn't really a top priority, it might be something interesting, but it sounded more like a nice to have. It's the classic vitamin, versus a painkiller, right? And you want to go after those painkillers that really move the needle for somebody's solving somebody's pain point. So that was sort of a major pivot. I would say a minor pivot, which was actually critical to where we are today, is so Jonathan, that I mentioned earlier, one of my co-founders, who's our CTO, he actually has experience exiting a company. His first computer vision company was bought by GoPro, acquired by GoPro, where he led the very first computer vision division there. And so when we actually first started getting going, we were experimenting with mobile devices like iOS devices, but just due to sort of the frame rate issues back at the time for a lot of fast motion movement, we were using GoPros. So 2 GoPros on 2 tripods to capture somebody's, let's say, swing, right? But it was a really kind of manual, cumbersome process. Like you have to record on 2 GoPros, you take the 2 SD cards out, you have 2 people operating the 2 GoPros, then you have to download the videos onto your laptop. You have to slice and splice and cut your video, upload it to the cloud. All of that was manual. So even all the onboardings, we have to go on site to visit teams, visit organizations or coaches to be able to show them how to do A to Z. Then the pandemic hit. Everything shut down, as we all know. And when things were gradually opening up and resuming, we noticed that still there was a very strong restriction for a third party or a vendor, to be able to visit on site. And so we threw some innovation at this problem, which is then we made at that point the really hard rudder right decision to go completely on iOS and to automate everything that I just mentioned that we were doing on GoPros. So you automatically capture, you can just do one device because the two automatically sync with one another. It uploads to the cloud and comes back down. And then, in about 5 to 10 minutes, you can see all the 3D visualized metrics of your player's swing or their throw, of their squats or jumps. And, that was a magical moment, but it was really born by necessity because we needed to find a way of, one, automating as much as we can to make the process way easier, reducing friction for the user, and 2, solving the fact that we can't be on site, which is actually now great because we're doing almost all our onboardings virtually.
Yeah, that is key. And something else you mentioned before we started recording was the whole team, for the most part. I think everybody is working remote. How do you manage that? How do you keep it cohesive? How do you keep all the moving pieces centralized and making sure you're working towards the long-term central vision?
Great question. I ought to say, I don't think I've certainly cracked, that code. It's stuff I still, for example, at the leadership level, and the co-founders, we try to meet in person, and we're still kind of all Bay Area based. So at least once a month over lunch or over, we go into a WeWork. At the leadership level, we try to do it once quarterly. And ideally for the entire company, and when I say entire company, we're still relatively small, we're like 18 people. We try to get everybody together, maybe once every 12 or 18 months to do like an offsite together. Because I do think that, that in-person cultural connection really does matter, especially given our employees. It's very diverse, not just within representation in the US, multiple states from, East Coast, West Coast, in between to Europe and then to India. That I think building that cultural fabric, kind of rallying around that central vision of improving human movement performance and movement health is really vital. But we are very engineering technical heavy as a company. They're doing an immense job in terms of using all the digital kind of tools that are at our disposal today to build a little 24-hour turnaround cycle, which really helps us accelerate any kind of innovation.
Yeah, the machine learning, artificial intelligence space is really fascinating, especially with tech becoming easier to build over time and your co-founders coming from that world and you guys getting in it before it got super popular over the last 2. What are you seeing in that space? Where do you see it going? Obviously, I'm sure even at Tesla and some of your other companies, you saw early signs of it. From a more macro perspective, what are you seeing in, we'll just call it machine learning, artificial intelligence? We could dig into every little detail between the two, but we'll just bucket it to keep it easier. And then also how you're applying it and leveraging it into Uplift.
Yeah. So there's a lot there in the question, but
Right.
I'll try to keep it macro and then maybe kind of go into a little bit of a micro shameless plug. So on a macro level, you're absolutely right. And it's nothing absolutely new, especially in our area where, for the longest time, we've been sort of focused on more of the computer vision, machine learning side. You're right, Tesla, a lot of the, of course, current models, but even back then, when I was there at 2014, we were using computer vision, right, to doing some of the first starts of self-driving capabilities. And now where I live in San Francisco, I think they must have over 700, if not more, fleets of Waymos out there where it's completely self-driving. And in fact, personally, it's hard for me to go back to an Uber or a Lyft after experiencing Waymo because it feels like you're riding in first class. But yeah, I think anything to do where video-based computer vision can solve it will solve it in the near future. We see that tidal wave happening right now. So that means maybe there's certain applications for wearables, like my Oura Ring, for example. I mean, that's something that I think computer vision is going to have a tough time doing. Or, Apple Watches, I think there's certain use cases for those, or Whoop. But in terms of wearables to help track, an athlete's, let's say, 3D movement, especially if you think about what they're doing today, right? They're going to a sports club and there's like maybe an 8 to 15 camera array. They have to put all these sensors on their body. And even though you might be getting very, clinically accurate results, it's clinical. In other words, it's not getting your game performance or your practice, moments. And I think, you lose quite a bit of things there, versus being able to just use computer vision, whether you're using broadcast footage or you're putting, devices or ubiquitous devices like iPhone and iPads out on the field, when they're playing or practicing. I think that's a game changer, kind of in our sport area. And then, yeah, obviously with OpenAI, they opened up the floodgate in terms of what's possible on the Gen AI side. I mean, I use it daily. I was hearing somebody who was a thought leader in the space, so I don't want to take credit for it, but it's interesting because I could also see, and sometimes finding myself doing it, and I'd be curious, Andrew, if you do it too, but it's almost like having even a strategic thought partner. So it's moving away from like, hey, can you just edit this so there's less grammatical errors and it's more concise, to like, I'm considering a left or right, red pill, blue pill decision. If you were like an investor and you saw this pitch deck, like, what would you think? And I think what's also very interesting that we're starting to see is some more creative aspects of Gen AI, where it can actually help you maybe start to build an investor pitch deck, let's say, right? We're not so far from it. And yeah, I just think it is definitely opening a world of augmented capabilities to even make the human element more powerful, but the capabilities of what we can do.
Do you use, we'll just call it ChatGPT, more than Google search now, or where do you fall in line with that?
Great question. I think for me personally, it's about equal.
I'd say I'm about the same, but it's starting to shift more. I like the strategic thinker model. Selfishly, and sorry to all our people in this, but I'd love for it to take some of the legal work on, right? We all, especially as founders or investors or whatever, spend a lot of money on all this legal stuff. And we all know it's templated and pretty standard stuff. I don't know. It's an interesting, we go off on a tangent for another hour about it. But so tell us a little bit, to not go too off the beaten path, about your product. You're going a little bit to the consumer side, movement analysis platform. I know you'd mentioned it earlier, press release a couple days ago or maybe yesterday. Give us a little bit more on that, as that's your latest thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy and excited to. So yesterday, as you mentioned, was our launch day. We've, over the last, 7 years, if you go back in time, we really founded the company to really empower every athlete at any skill level at any location. So this is why, part as we were having a conversation on, that we went to mobile devices as kind of that bet in the future. But as mentioned, our current primary product, Uplift Capture, uses 2 iPhones or 2 iPads to get very close to lab grade accurate 3D biomechanical movements. And so we have over 50 top U.S. Sports organizations, leagues, academies, and college programs that I talked about earlier, utilizing it, which we're very thankful, and we continue to innovate on that product. But we also got a lot of feedback from coaches and trainers and the athletes themselves in the areas of 3 things. They're like, one, hey, I don't have a biomechanics or kinematics degree. Like, I don't really understand how to read this because it is a little bit of a technical product. Or we had, feedback saying, 5 to 10 minutes is great if you're a performance scientist or biomechanist just collecting data. But if I'm a coach working with an athlete, I need to give them real-time feedback, and your product doesn't allow that. And the third element is, hey, 2 iPhones and 2 iPads, those aren't the most cheapest devices, and it's just a little bit more setup that's involved, even though it's less than a minute. But can you get it down on a single camera? So those 3 requests have been with us for a few years. So we've been in R&D for over 2 years on this product. We may not be necessarily the first to come to market with a 3D, I'm doing air quotes, a 3D, motion capture on a single camera device, but we wanted to be the best at it and the most, I would say, on the user experience, seamless at it. So what we launched yesterday is our single camera product that we call just Uplift for short. And what it entails is we brought our Uplift Capture 3D engine to the single camera, which has been trained on top professional, elite athlete data. Then we brought actionable insights. So it's so easy to understand. Just like if you open up your Whoop or your Apple Watch, like dashboard, right? You know, like how many hours you slept, for example, your recovery, your HRV, things like that. We distill it down. So it's very easy to understand. And then on the Gen AI note, we actually been training a specific Gen AI model around personalizing what we're seeing in the movement patterns. Like, for example, is there a lot of ankle immobility? If so, is there a risk for an ACL tear? Or how do we help you? The first actually use case that we have is a jump higher assessment. So it's, or more classically known as a counter movement jump assessment, a vertical jump assessment, which is critical for like basketball players, volleyball players, and really anybody who has contact with the ground, right? Because it's helping you develop your power and explosiveness off the ground. So this is an easy way to track your jump height as an example, and then look at your different joints and seeing if there's a left and right imbalance, for example. Are there any asymmetries? And we help identify that, and then give you personalized prescription using the Gen AI engine that we have. So it's as if you have not just a coach in your pocket, but a physical therapist in your pocket, a sports scientist in your pocket, a full performance lab, and force plates in your pocket. We roll all that up into one experience, and you can, just like ChatGPT, talk to your AI coach, saying, "Hey, if this is a recommended program, and 45 pounds is a little too heavy for me to do a Turkish get up. Is it okay if I go down like to 8, reps instead? But then at that point, what weight should I use?" And it'll just give you instant feedback, which we think is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it's a very cool product that you released there. Congrats on that.
Thank you so
Close
much.
this out. Question we ask everyone, Masa, is what other trends are you keeping an eye on? What are you paying attention to? Some of that might relate to Uplift stuff, but curious to see where your focus is now. Obviously, the AI is a little bit more in the rear view, where you see things going, or other macro trends that might play an impact that you're like, okay, this is interesting. We need to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe to bookend a little bit, going all the way back to our earlier conversation around musculoskeletal, that universe is really wide. It's not just sports, right? We know it's applicable to fitness from my own CrossFit journey, as well as to, kind of the physical therapy area. And also, I think, which is something that's gaining a lot of steam these days, is the whole longevity, conversation, which I've been, very, very tracking closely, from Andrew Huberman to Peter Attia, to the whole blue zone concepts. I mean, there is a strong and crucial element around movement, that helps people expand their, not just lifespan, but their health span. So that is of immense interest to us. I think even for, not just myself, like, want to live to 100 kind of thing. But also, as a company, how do we start to deploy our tech in areas where, and we consider athletes anybody with a body. So not just servicing organizations and teams like we do today, or individual consumers, which we will now start to do with our new app launch, but even seniors. So they can do a sit stand test, using a single camera, or maybe, there's a test where, go floor to, when you're standing up from the floor, how many times do you have to touch the floor? If it's more than 3, then, you definitely probably need to work on, certain areas of your body and your, your muscles. So I do think we can really help people age gracefully also. And for me personally, as well as I think for the company, that is of immense interest.
Yeah, and I like the concept of everyone's an athlete, which is true, and more people pushing toward that. A lot of thanks to the Hubermans and the Rogans and the Tias and Sinclairs of the world that are sort of opening a lot of people's eyes to a lot of the garbage that's out there and how to, recognize it, but then become healthier. And so something like Uplift fits right in. So Cool stuff. Yeah. Closing out, website, socials, where people can learn more. That'll be awesome, and we'll wrap it up.
Amazing. Yeah, so you can find more information about Uplift on our website at uplift.ai. We're also on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as X. So those are kind of our social handles. But yeah, we would be jazzed if we have a 30-day free trial for our just launched and announced app. So I'd love for people to be able to see and not only their jump height but understand the trend line. And then we also have the ability to make groups, so you can share it among your friends or maybe your teammates and see where you stack rank eventually, within your city, state, or even in the nation. So those are some fun aspects of seeing, where the trend lines might be. But really appreciate this opportunity to be on your podcast, Andrew. It was great to meet you. Huge fan of Profluence too, which I forgot to say in the very beginning.
That's all right. You said it at the end, and I'm telling people go download the app and try it out if you haven't already. And yeah, thanks for coming on, Masa. This was awesome, and look forward to diving deeper into some of the other concepts, maybe offline on the AI, and just what a fun time. What a fun time.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me.